Why our best defense is not always our best defense in today's episode. Welcome to the show. This is Licensure Lifeline, and this is your host, Matt Lawson. I'm excited to announce that I got my first subscription to the show the other day, and you know who you are. I just want to thank you wholeheartedly. I did not start this podcast as a way to make money. I thought it would be kind of a cool thing to add that option with maybe the idea of someday making this something bigger than I started it out to be. But I just wanted to thank this individual. I will not mention your name, but it is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. Also, taking care of some other business. We do have an Instagram page now that I am adding pretty regularly to. You can find like flashcards and other little tips and tricks around studying there as well. Just another resource for everybody to help you learn more. Okay, so today's episode is going to focus on defense mechanisms. This was something that Sigmund Freud came up with. It's one of the tenets in psychoanalytics. But these are basically little unconscious processes that our minds employ in order to protect us, protect our egos from anxiety and internal conflict. The way defense mechanisms come up for people is absolutely fascinating. They really are something that are developed like when we're pretty young. In our brains, our emotions, our egos figure out like they work then, and they become very generalized to our world. Sometimes we outgrow a lot of our defense mechanisms. Some defense mechanisms we actually grow into, but it's all about protecting those inner workings from the external world and the things that are coming into us and being tossed around and processed. The way I've come to see defense mechanisms is they provide some short-term relief, but oftentimes can result in long-term negative impacts for people. As an example, let's look at something like repression. This is something I'm sure you've heard of. Repressed thoughts, repressed emotions. You see this a lot of times when somebody has a really traumatic event and they may not even recall any of the details of the event, especially the ones that were more traumatic, and they repress those in order to protect themselves. In the short term, repression does exactly what it's supposed to do. It keeps those thoughts and memories from really just causing pain and causing anxiety. However, the long-term impact of this may result in the person never really coming to understand or processing through the traumatic event in a way that gives them some semblance of closure. And they can carry these thoughts and feelings around with them forever. Well, not forever. That's a very long time. For for long periods of time without actually ever addressing them. So I'm going to go through a list now of just some of the other psychoanalytical defense mechanisms that are commonly seen. Denial, first up here. Second up if you consider repression as the first one. You've heard of people living in denial. This is where the person refuses to accept an external reality because it's just too threatening. Arguing against an anxiety-provoking stimulus by stating that it just doesn't exist. Next up, we have projection. This is one I see a lot, especially when I do couples work. I'll see one person in the couple projecting their thoughts and feelings onto the other person a lot of times in that situation. But this is where one attributes their unacceptable thoughts and feelings along with motives to another person. So you can imagine how that can impact a relationship. Displacement, redirecting emotions to a substitute target that is less threatening or more acceptable. Regression, another one of my favorites. Moving back to a previous psychosexual stage where some psychic energy remained fixated. Sublimation, next up, is a defense mechanism where negative or socially unacceptable impulses are transformed into positive actions. This often results in a socially beneficial outcome. So, an example here might be someone who experiences intense bouts of aggression, a trait that could potentially lead to destructive outcomes. Instead of acting on these aggressive impulses, the individual channels this energy into something constructive like martial arts or football, something that has some aggressiveness to it where they're able to physically take out those repressed feelings on a target. And it's a little bit more socially acceptable to kick somebody in the face when you're doing martial arts or tackle somebody. So they're able to transform this aggressive energy into something that is productive and socially valued, even. Moving on to reaction formation. This is where an individual behaves in a way that is directly opposite their actual feelings or impulses, often because those feelings are perceived to be unacceptable. So, a good example of this might be a person who, let's say, harbors some hostility toward a colleague and may exhibit overly friendly and supportive demeanor towards them when they're in public, face to face. And by adopting this opposite behavior, the person is attempting to conceal their true feelings under the guise of exaggerated positivity. This behavior not only protects the individual from confronting their genuine emotions, but also helps maintain social harmony. So they're able to kill a couple birds with one stone here, right? They're able to hide their true feelings and also avoid conflict through reaction formation. I'm very guilty of this next one, intellectualization. Um, Mansplaining is a defense mechanism where a person avoids experiencing uncomfortable emotions by focusing on abstract thoughts, logics, and reasoning. So it's not exactly mansplaining, but I think mansplaining can fall under this category. Um, so, example here, consider a guy who has recently been informed of a serious personal health diagnosis. Instead of expressing fear or sadness or stress or anxiety or whatever, he might delve deeply into the statistics of his condition, research all the possible treatments exhaustively, and speak at length about the biological processes involved, like really disconnecting himself as far as possible from the actual issue that's going on through research. Um, by concentrating on the clinical theoretical aspects of his diagnosis, he effectively distances himself emotionally from the reality of the situation. Okay. This next one is something that I don't talk a lot about with people. Definitely something I've seen, but I think I always forget about it. It's this defense mechanism is called undoing, and this is where a person attempts to counteract thoughts, feelings, or actions that are perceived as unacceptable or harmful with the opposite behavior, often to alleviate guilt or anxiety. So it sounds a little bit like reaction formation, right? But what we have here, an example would be a parent who loses their temper and yells at their child. Then they feel really guilty about the outburst. And in order to undo the behavior, they might excessively be kind to the child and indulge them and buy them gifts and offer them treats. So, this overcompensation is not just an attempt to relieve their own feelings of guilt, but also serves to reassure the parent that they're still a good and caring parent despite the previous negative interaction. All right, let's get into isolation. This is where an individual separates emotions from ideas or events to avoid distressing feelings. This mechanism involves mentally compartmentalizing aspects of an experience that are just so emotionally overwhelming that it, it may just paralyze the individual in an instant. So, to allow a person to break past that paralyzation, to push past the memories and thoughts of that traumatic event, they just detach. So, an example of this would be someone who has experienced a violent assault may recount the incident in precise detail with seemingly little or no emotional response. So, by isolating the emotional aspect of the memory, the person can discuss the factual sequence of events without necessarily re experiencing the intense fear or pain associated with this. This is something I'm always looking out for when I'm working with somebody in trauma or working yeah, working with any type of trauma with somebody, the last thing you want to do is re-traumatize an individual. And this defense mechanism is in place because that's what the person wants as well. They do not want to re-traumatize themselves. So when they can just talk about the facts around the event and not necessarily the emotion, it oftentimes is a good place to start when working with somebody that has experienced significant trauma, is just being in that place where it's not necessarily just about emotion. Again, like you always want to be on the lookout for re-traumatizing, but this is something to consider when working with trauma. Next up, we have splitting. This is something that is often observed with people that have borderline personality disorder, where their perception of themselves and others oscillates between extremes of idealization and devaluation. An example here might be a person that initially views their therapist as perfect and infallible and just the best professional they've ever met and can't say enough about them. However, later on, if the therapist makes even the most minor mistake or disagrees with the client, the person might suddenly perceive the therapist as wholly incompetent and even malicious. Okay, last one I'm going to cover here, last defense mechanism is fantasy. This involves a person engaging in daydreaming, fantastical thinking as a way to escape from unpleasant realities to cope with feelings of dissatisfaction or unmet needs. I've seen this phenomena when I work with people. I like to call it lottery thinking, where they will talk about all the things that they want, but beyond talking about like the things that they want, there is an aspect to it that's just fantastical about the money that they're going to make, about the things they're going to own with the monies that they're going to make, about the relationships that they're going to have because of those monies. And it's interesting to watch what happens. A lot of times they'll get caught up in that fantasy world and almost live a part of their life in that fantasy world because it's just so much warmer and friendlier and kinder than their actual world that they lose track of their goals to push toward that world. And a lot of the times with therapy, working with that is kind of bursting that bubble a bit and getting them back to a place where they're grounded now and seeing what is a reasonable way to work towards some of the things that they want. All right, let's go over some questions that you might see on the NCE for this category. First up, what defense mechanisms involves denying the reality of a painful situation? Is it A, sublimation, B, reaction formation, C, denial, or D, repression? Answer to this one is going to be denial. Is the refusal to accept reality or facts, blocking external events from awareness. Number two, which defense mechanism describes redirecting emotional feelings from their original source to a substitute target? Is it A, undoing, B, rationalization, C, regression, or D, displacement? The answer here is going to be D, displacement. Protects the mind from feelings that are too difficult for the psyche to handle. Number three, if someone consistently attributes their own feelings and incompetencies to their peers, which defense mechanism are they likely employing? Is it A, projection, B, repression, C, displacement, or D, sublimation? The answer here is going to be A. This involves taking attributes, or projection involves taking attributes or feelings the person finds unacceptable within themselves and ascribing it to others. All right, that's it for the questions. As far as study strategies go for this, I would play around with some different mnemonics here. Something like the word prison, PRISONS, P for projection, R for repression, I for intellectualization, S for sublimation, O for overcompensation, N for negation, which we didn't go over, and S for suppression. So, you're going to have fun with some different words here. I also like putting these into stories to help me kind of remember some of the different explanations of these. But that is going to be it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, um, keep in mind I am hoping to someday do some interviews with people. If you've made it this far in the podcast and you're liking what you're hearing, I would really love to interview people that have taken the test, see what their thoughts were on it, see what tripped them up. If you can give some insight into others to help them pass these tests, absolutely. Why not do this all together? But until next time, keep studying and take care.